Welcome to the Modern Marketing Engine podcast, hosted by Bernie Borges. This is the podcast for the modern marketer who wants to hear from their peers in the trenches and the occasional analyst or rockstar influencer sharing strategies and tactics about what's working in modern marketing. Be sure to listen to the end of each episode for Bernie's summary and takeaways so you can plan your next move in your own modern marketing journey.
Hey there, welcome to episode 238 of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. I'm Bernie Borges, CMO of Vengreso, and your host. Hey, thanks for listening. Hey, my guest on this episode is Erik Peterson, CEO of Corporate Visions. Erik, welcome to the Modern Marketing Engine podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Erik, why don't we begin our conversation? We're here to talk about something that is very, very genuine to your company, Corporate Visions. So let's begin first, Erik, with a little bit of background on you, introduction to you and your company, Corporate Visions.
Sure. So I'm the CEO of Corporate Visions. I've been with the company for 13 years now and worked my way up through the organization, starting as a consultant and running the consulting team and eventually to the CEO position. And during that time, I impacted a lot of our intellectual property. In fact, I'm co-author of 2 of our books, Conversations That Win the Complex Sale, and also the 3 Value Conversations. So that's a bit about me. Prior to coming to Corporate Visions, I was in sales in the high-tech space, both carrying a bag and a quota and leading and managing sales teams. So that's a little bit of background about me.
Sure. So Erik, for my listener who may not be familiar with the company, tell us a little bit about Corporate Visions.
Probably the simplest way to describe us is a sales and marketing effectiveness company. But if you were to ask customers why they come to us, ultimately why they choose us is because what they're looking to do is come up with the most compelling, simple, differentiated, and memorable message that they can take to the market and deploy that message through various content assets. So whether it's website pages, whether it's videos, or through sales enablement to their sales team so that their salespeople can carry on that message and that conversation when they're having those important discussions with a customer sitting 3 feet across the desk from them. That's what we do. And we do this work all over the world. And about 50,000 people a year experience it in one form or another. So that's us.
Fantastic. Thank you for that background, Erik. So we are here to talk about exactly that, the integration of messaging and marketing and sales, the power of words. You know, we live in this really hyper-fast, crowded market. Buyers are bombarded with messaging all day long. And your whole company is premised on the fact that words matter, right? Messaging is very important. And, you know, Erik, sometimes the difference between 1 or 2 words can really impact the results. And your company publishes a report called the State of Conversation Report. And the most recent version of that is titled One Little Word, One Big Difference, the impact of euphrasing on customer conversations. So let's unpack that a little bit. We're doing a webinar on that with your company, Vengreso and Corporate Visions, February 19th. So let's unpack what's in this report a little bit. First, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you describe the report in general? What did we cover in this report in terms of euphrasing?
Yeah, so let me back up for a second, because I do think one of the things that's important to understand is how we come up with insight to bring to the market. So I feel like in the world of marketing and sales, there's a really unique issue and challenge that everybody who's trying to be excellent at their job faces. I'd contrast what's happening in what it's like to work in marketing and sales with the challenges that a lot of the companies we work with are trying to solve. So 50% of our work today is with high-tech companies. And if you ask them the problems they're solving for their customers, what those companies would say is that today we live in a world of big data. And the biggest challenge is in a world that is data rich, how do you get meaning from all of that data? So the high-tech companies would say the world is data rich, but theory poor. And what I would say is in the world of marketing and sales, you have the exact opposite problem. Marketing and sales is actually a world that is theory rich. It seems everybody has an idea on what they think works and what doesn't, but it's very data poor. Actual well-conducted studies to test, does that theory actually prove out in the real world, are few and far between. So for us as an organization, we're seeking to try and do better than that. We're seeking to say a whole bunch of theories or unexamined folklore about the way marketing and sales works isn't helpful to the practitioner. For the practitioner, what you need is confidence that the choice you're going to make will work. And so what we do that is different is we fund studies with professors at Stanford University here in the US and Warwick University in London. And we ask them, the experts, to test different theories in marketing and sales in really large studies to see if, in fact, those ideas work and which ones work best. So we've done this now, I believe it's 15 times over the last 4 years.
So 15 specific studies, Erik? Is that what
correct.
you're...
Yeah.
Okay.
Around marketing and sales, specifically centered on messaging and conversations. And what we've done is we take that data, and every time we produce a new study, we put it in the state of the conversation report. So if you looked over time, you'd see that we've attacked the idea of visual storytelling. Does it work? And is there one visual that works better than another visual, for example? We've attacked the idea of what kind of messaging and what framework works best when what you're trying to do is to secure a new logo customer. And is it, in fact, the same messaging and same framework when they're an existing customer and you're the incumbent? Again, we've done this now, I believe, 15 times over the last 4 years. And every time we do one of these, we produce a report called the State of the Conversation Report so that the practitioners out there can learn from it. And it's not opinion-based. It's evidence-based. So in this particular situation, one of the things that we were hearing from customers is the way they produce copy that they use in the world to try and engage customers, whether it's, say, email copy, for example, and you're trying to hook somebody and gain their interest, or if it's someone further along in the sales process and maybe it's copy for a landing page or you actually want them to go ahead and make a purchase, what copy works best? And in that area, what was interesting was we really heard two different stories around that. So what you would hear is some people who say, well, we need to get across what it is we do and communicate that. And in fact, we're going to use an approach that you'll hear me describe as we phrasing, which communicates we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. And others saying, no, it's got to be more customer focused than that. And instead, you're going to use you phrasing. So speaking to the customer in ways that say, you will be able to do this, you will be able to accomplish this.
Okay.
So the first thing was for us to determine, is this in fact something that people wrestle with at all, right? Is there actually any controversy around this, or does everybody just fall in one camp?
I would even ask, Erik, is it even a conscious decision? Do marketers and copywriters even proactively think in terms of we're going to write it in we phrasing or write it in you phrasing?
So that's a great question. And to speak to that, so in our partnership with you, which is how we put together this quarter's State of the Conversation report, what we did was we put together a survey. And the survey is where we see what people are already doing, what their existing beliefs are. So we did a survey of marketing and sales professionals, and we simply presented them with the question, when you produce your copy or if you're a salesperson, when you're speaking to a customer, do you have a dominant form that you normally use? And so what was interesting was it was split almost perfectly down the middle. 47% of the respondents said they we-phrase their messages. And they're doing it for a specific reason. What they're trying to do is position themselves as a trusted partner, right? So we're in this together, and we as a partner bring expertise and insights to customers. And so that was the thinking and theory behind that. So that was 47%. Slightly less than that, 40% of people identified as people who actually you-phrase and do that in a very focused way. And the idea behind you phrasing is because it transfers ownership to the customer. They can feel and see themselves in the story that you're telling. And so they took that approach. So what was interesting is when we asked the first question, which approach do you use? 47% say they we phrase, 40% said you phrase. Another 7% just said, we don't actually have a philosophy on that, right? So to your point, Bernie, they really weren't doing one thing consciously or not. They just weren't engaged in that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
what is further more interesting about that is then we asked a follow-on question, which is, which approach do you think is likely to be more effective, the we phrasing or the you phrasing? Now, what's interesting is 47% of people said they we phrase, 40% said they you phrase. When asked, though, this same group what they thought would be more effective, 52% said, well, actually, I think you phrasing would be more effective, even though only 40% are doing it. So it's one of those situations where just asking the question gets people sometimes to be a bit more thoughtful and say,
Yeah.
Wait a minute. So that was the first thing. And that's what we do with these conversation reports is say, well, what are you doing out there today?
So isn't that a bit of a paradox then, Erik, that finding, that discrepancy between what they're doing and what they think should be done?
Yeah, there's a discrepancy there, which I think was triggered by the question in the first place, right? So all of a sudden it got people thinking and then wondering, maybe I'm not doing it right. But what I think it really points to is just uncertainty in the people who have to do this for a living around what is the right approach? What should they be doing? And they're not wrong to be uncertain about it. There's not been much research on this. Some of the research and the way we work is we look for, is there established decision-making science out there around a question like this? And so we look for those studies. There was a study done by Robert Cialdini, who's one of the giants in research.
Yeah.
And he did a study with a cable TV company back when cable was brand new. So this was in 1982 in Tempe, Arizona. And it was a survey where people went house to house to ask if there'd be any interest in cable TV in this town before it arrived. And they had one group of surveyors who asked about it by talking about the benefits in a fairly straightforward way of having cable TV. And then they had another group that went around and in their surveys first asked people to imagine this service and what it might be like. And so what they would say is, imagine you could do this, and imagine you could do this, and what if you could do this? So using you phrasing to pull them into the story. And so that was a survey done before the service was available. The service became available a few months later, and what they saw, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like a 20% delta to the positive for those who had gone through the survey with the you phrasing in it.
Mm-hmm.
That signed up for cable TV when it first became available to them. So there was that gap there, but we phrasing wasn't even in play, so that wasn't one of the options.
Mm-hmm.
It was 1982, and it was to consumers. And one of the things you learn in decision-making science is that responses are very context dependent and very situational. And so one of the things that's important is to make sure you're testing these things in a context, in a situation that is real world as possible to the situation you're trying to learn about. And so there was that study. There was another study done at Ohio State. This is only a few years ago, but it only had 80 participants. And of course, those are college students. And it produced some bias in favor of you phrasing. Again, we phrasing wasn't really tested against other ways you might phrase things.
Now, in this report that we co-published, the study was done around 2 specific emails, right?
Yes.
So that was more, the context there was a B2B context.
That's correct. Right. And so that's where we felt like we really needed to push this in order to get information that you could trust, to learn and get a tactic that maybe you could make a simple change, but that simple change would be high leverage, right? So maybe just changing one word in your copy could make a difference. So what we did was we partnered with Dr. Nick Lee, who's a professor of social psychology at Warwick University in London. And we did this study with 1,200 participants. So that's important, right? You need to get the volumes high enough. And in most academic settings, they just don't have the funding to do it. But because it's part of our commercial approach to the market, we can afford to do it, right? So we can fund more serious, bigger studies. And so the first test was examining the effectiveness of you phrasing versus we phrasing in 2 B2B messages in a cold email sent to an unsuspecting prospect who has no knowledge or notion that they need the products or services from the company sending the email.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal was to be able to measure the interest level and urgency that could be created to solve the problem being presented. And so when you put together one of these studies, the really important thing is to control all of the variables except the one you're testing for. So the copy is almost identical between the emails. They're exactly the same length, exactly the same benefits. And the only thing that was changed was the we phrasing and you phrasing across both. So we did that study. And what we found is participants who received the you phrased message felt 21% more responsible for solving the problem than those who received the we phrased message. So if you think about that, one of the powers of you phrasing when done appropriately is supposed to be that it transfers ownership to the person on the receiving end.
Right.
They actually see themselves in the story, they see the problem, and they see themselves as the person who must solve for it, at least in theory. And in fact, that translated here. They felt 21% more responsible for solving the problem. So that's important. One of the big challenges with email is just getting people to actually process it in their brain as opposed to dismiss it right away. Go ahead.
I want to comment on the fact that what was tested here, Eric, was email. And email has application both coming from the marketing team that does email, right? Because email comes from marketing. But email also is sent by sales individuals, sellers, to prospects and customers that they're working with. So the potential impact of using this you phrasing effectively helps both the brand and the marketing that they're doing as a brand, as well as the selling individual that he or she is doing when they're communicating one-to-one with their prospects and customers. And that's powerful.
Yeah, it's really important. And to see that kind of lift from one change, one simple change of word, again, across a large participant set, right, across 1,200, to see that consistent across that set. And again, designed not by us. So what we would do was we went to Dr. Lee and said, design a study to test for this effect and see what it produces. Because he's the expert on knowing how to put that together. We just wanted to know what the right answer was. So what we saw was this big lift from a you phrased message. People felt more responsible for solving the problem. That's not the only thing it impacted. The people who received that message also felt 13% more strongly that they needed to take action. So if you can get people to feel they own solving the problem and a higher need to take action, you've done a lot with just one simple email. It did impact other things, like almost double digits said they were more inclined to view the problem as important to their future success than receive the we phrase message. But if I was going to say, what was the key takeaway from that, was that with your prospecting emails, whether you're a salesperson or a marketer who's putting together a campaign, using you phrasing is a more effective way to get prospects to question their status quo and raise the problem to the top of the organization's strategic agenda, right? Because they feel ownership of it, they feel like they need to take action, and they feel that it's important to their future success. All accomplished through about the simplest high leverage change that you can make. So that's it from the prospecting side. But we didn't want to just test that, because there's also this feeling in marketing, and I'd say even more in sales, that as you move further down the funnel, it's important to communicate we more. Again, this idea of partnership, and that, you're going to be there. It's like you're getting married to the customer, walking arm in arm down the aisle, best buddies forever. And you find that very strong, particularly in sales organizations, that, well, you certainly need to we phrase for the end, for the close. And so we wanted to test that as well. And so we did a second study.
Okay.
And this one was a warm communication. So provided to a prospect who has already expressed interest in the solution and now wants to learn more in order to possibly make a decision, again, in a B2B context. So the goal was to measure interest and intention in buying. Again, so think of this now as designed as what might be a landing page on the web, or a 2-page flyer or something that you would give to a customer. What we found in that study is participants who received the you phrase message scored it 11% higher as a convincing case to purchase.
Okay.
Those who received the we phrase message.
And these weren't specifically emails, or were they emails?
So these were set up as landing pages for the customers to get to. Yeah.
Okay. And the end result was the you phrasing had the 11% higher
convincing case to purchase.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
But not just that. So there's other things were tested. So people who received the you phrase message were 10% more likely to purchase. So yes, the case was convincing, and they're also saying, and I'm more likely to purchase. And also saw higher response that it was just a more compelling message than those who received the we phrase message.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I come back to, I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, Erik, but just the power of the fact that this approach to this key messaging, you phrase messaging, can be applied across so many different aspects of how a marketer markets and how a seller communicates, even in day-to-day communication. And you even referenced the fact that the journey with the customer evolves over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're a prospect until they become a customer. And even when they're a customer, I had a previous guest on my podcast who said a customer is a perpetual prospect because not only do you want them to make repeat purchases, but depending on what you sell, you may have multiple product lines and that sort of thing. So there may be many other opportunities for incremental business. So a customer is a perpetual prospect. So the application of this you phrasing has just so many applications.
We'll be back in a moment with my conversation with Erik Peterson. As you listen to my conversation with Erik Peterson, CEO of Corporate Visions, I challenge you to ask yourself, can one little word make that big of a difference in your marketing campaigns and sales messaging? Is there actually a law of diminishing returns in your personalization? Recent research shows that 98% of marketers believe that personalization is important, but only 12% think that they're doing it right. So where's the disconnect? I invite you to join Tim Reister, Chief Strategy Officer at Corporate Visions, and yours truly, Bernie Borges, CMO of Vengreso, for a webinar on February 19th, 2019 at 2 p.m. Eastern, as we share new research featuring results from a rigorous academic study and simulation that's going to help you confidently pick the right way to refer to your audience and to get them to take immediate action. Now, as a bonus, you'll also see the results of an initial field test that delivers surprising results when it comes to the level of personalization effort required to maximize click-through rates. So to register for this live webinar, visit vengreso.com/events. Now, if you're hearing this after February 19th, no worries, you can get the webinar recording playback there. Now, this URL that I just mentioned will be linked up in our show notes page at vengreso.com.
What I think I'd like to do is just to be mindful of our time here together on this podcast episode, Erik, is segue over to the hardest part of the episode.
Okay.
And that is where I do a summary, a recap of the key points that we discussed. And then, Erik, I'm going to invite you to either fill in any holes on what we discussed, what I summarized, as well as if you want to elaborate on something, if I jog your memory on a key point. And then after that, we'll ask you to just let my listener know where they can connect with you online and learn more about what you've got going on. And of course, we'll let them know about where they can learn more about our upcoming webinar on February 19th, as well as anybody who's listening to this after February 19th. So we started our conversation, Erik, with a brief introduction to you and Corporate Visions. You've been at the company 13 years. You kind of worked your way up the ladder, starting as a consultant. You're a co-author of 2 books, and you grew up in sales, previously in sales and technology. And likewise, myself, I started my career in software sales. And your company, Corporate Visions, is all about sales and marketing effective messaging, helping companies across the globe come up with the most compelling message that they can take to market across the spectrum of all their marketing communications, sales communications, website, video, again, sales enablement, that sort of thing. And then we kind of got right into the whole conversation around this state of conversation report. You gave some background on it. You kind of used the contrast that many companies consider the biggest challenge that they have as having a lot of data. And we just live in this world of big data, but it's difficult to get meaning out of all that data. And the challenge in marketing and sales is that we're theory rich, just like we're data rich, but we're poor in insights. So we have to really prove theories out as marketers and sellers. And the practitioner really needs to be confident that the message that they're using is going to work, particularly since there's so much investment that goes into the execution of whatever messaging is arrived at. So your company, Corporate Visions, has funded studies, 15 studies to be exact, if I got that correct, with universities to test ideas. And each study results in a state of conversation report. And so the specific report that we talked about here today is the report, the State of Conversation report, one little word, one big difference, the impact of you phrasing on customer conversations. And the study essentially looked at copy across two delivery channels, email and a landing page. And the approaches were the use of we phrasing and you phrasing. And you surveyed 1,200 marketers and sales professionals. You asked them if they use one of the phrases over the other, and 47% they use we phrase, 40% said they use you phrase, and 7% said, don't really think about it too much, don't have a philosophy on that. But then you asked the question, which approach do you think is more effective? And interestingly, 52% said that you phrase would be more effective, even though only 40% said they actually use you phrase. And so it really points to the uncertainty among marketers and sales professionals. And then you shared some of the studies that have taken place in years past, like dating back to the Stone Ages of 1982, when Robert Schell did that study with the cable company that really sort of proved out, even though it was a consumer study, as you pointed out, Eric, when going house to house and, sort of giving one group the benefits of cable television and the other one explaining to them, hey, if you could do this or if you could achieve that or experience that. And so the you phrasing in that scenario, some 35, 40 years ago, I'm doing the math real quickly here, it was a 20% delta on you phrasing. And even though it was consumer, it was significant. So in the context of this report here that you partnered with Dr. Nick Lee from Warwick Business School, 2 emails were sent of the same length, and the only difference between the two was we phrasing versus you phrasing. And one was a cold email that went to people who had no knowledge about the business, and the other one was a warm communication. And the results were really fascinating. Those who received the you phrasing message felt 21% more responsible for solving the problem than those who received the we phrasing. And then those who received the you phrasing felt 13% more strongly that they needed to take action, which is what we all want, to solve the identified problem than those who received the we phrasing. And then those who received the you phrasing message were almost double-digit more inclined to view the problem as important to their future success. I find that really, really fascinating. So really the key takeaway, Eric, that we discussed is that based on these findings, the you phrasing is a more effective way to get prospects to question their status quo and then really raise that problem to the top of their agenda when you're using the you phrasing approach versus the we phrasing approach. And then in the other one that went to warm prospects, the messaging on a landing page for warm prospects, that one had an 11% higher convincing case to purchase than landing pages that had we phrasing, and it had a 10% more likely to purchase than those that had the we phrasing message on the landing page. And then it was received as 6% higher as a compelling message over those that received the we phrasing on the landing page. So the takeaway on that is that you phrasing is a more effective way to make a convincing and compelling case on a landing page when it comes to making the purchase. And again, I think that was a B2B scenario that I failed to point out. So those are kind of the two key elements of the study and the findings and the takeaways. And of course, Eric, I'll remind my listener that we're doing a webinar on this on February 19th. We'll link that up in our show notes page. Of course, the place to find it is vengreso.com/events. If you're listening to this after February 19th, go to the same place, vengreso.com/events, and you'll be able to access the playback. But Eric, is there anything that you would like to add to my summary?
Yeah, just briefly. And that was a remarkable summary, Bernie, by the way. I should have you around me more. I would remember myself better what it is that I've said. The last thing I would say on this is if you just think about what's an action step you could take, it's take a look at some of the recent emails you or your team has sent, or some of the copy that you have on the web, or even things that you have in video form for customers, and look at how often you use the word you versus we, and see how you're performing on that. Because again, a simple change can make all the difference. The other piece I would add is that as your team starts to use you phrasing more, one of the things you'll see is that it actually forces them to get inside the customer's world more than they did before. It's really hard to write from a you phrased perspective without getting deep into how the customer thinks. It compels that. So it can have a even higher leverage effect than what was tested here, which was simply swap out the words when you're forcing yourself to start from that position from a copy perspective and keep it you phrased, you have no choice but to get deeper into the customer's world, which is, of course, everyone's goal when they're putting together a story for the market. And so I would leave you.
That is such a compelling point, Erik. I'm so glad that you made that point here at the very end of our episode. Where can my listener go to connect with you and learn more about what you and your team are up to at Corporate Visions?
You can go to corporatevisions.com, and that's where you'll find our website, and you can find links to all of our content and the various studies we've done. They're all available there for you to get them. And I know they'll also be in the show notes here. I'm available on social media. So if you go to EA Peterson on Twitter, that's me. And I'd love to hear from anybody who had a chance to listen to this. And thank you to those listening.
Fantastic. Well, Erik, my listener knows that we will link that up in our show notes at vengreso.com. And I do want to, again, remind my listener that we are conducting a webinar together on February 19th. If you're listening to this before that date, visit vengreso.com/events. If you're listening after that date, go to the same place and you'll see a link to the recording playback there as well. Erik, I want to thank you so much for joining me here today on this episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast.
Thank you for having me. I hope we get a chance to do it again sometime. This was fun. Thanks, Bernie.
This wraps up another inspiring episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. If you want to share this podcast with a friend, let them know that we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Podcasts. And we love 5-star reviews. If you are not subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast player so you don't miss an episode. You can read the show notes for each episode at vengreso.com. While you're there, sign up to receive the show notes delivered to your inbox through our weekly alerts. And be sure to also check out our Selling with Social podcast hosted by Vengreso CEO Mario Martinez Jr. Again, you'll find our show notes at vengreso.com. And that's one S in Vengreso. Tune in again next week when Bernie Borges brings you another inspiring interview to help you thrive on your modern marketing journey.